All right, welcome back to KFYR Plus and the news desk. And just recently, a grand jury in Texas indicted two former Uvalde school officers in a botched law enforcement response to the 2022 Robb Elementary School shooting. Former Uvalde school police chief Pete Arredondo and former school officer Adrian Gonzalez have been indicted. Now, joining me to talk about this case is Jeremy Rosenthal, a former prosecutor and current defense attorney. Jeremy, welcome back to KFYR Plus.
Thanks, Jay. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Well, this is going to be a case that's going to be closely watched by every law enforcement agency in America. Why is this so important, Jeremy?
Basically, the message here that is being sent by the grand jury and the prosecution in Uvalde is, if you're not going to go and take on a shooter, then don't put the badge on. I think it's that simple. Essentially, these officers are indicted for not doing the job that they signed up to do. So the prosecution saying, look, we gave you the training, we gave you the tools, we had the game plan in order. We gave you everything that you needed to save lives, and it didn't get done here. And that comes with some consequences that can be pretty harsh.
Are there any legal precedents or standards that will, count to use to evaluate the actions of Arredondo and Gonzalez during the shooting incident?
There is a little bit of precedent for it. There was an officer in Parkland, Florida, who was charged with and stood trial for child endangerment, similar to this. That officer was acquitted. So they've got that positive precedent going for them, if you will. But this is a very, very subjective claim. Child endangerment is essentially committed when you have a duty to do something, when you have a duty to act, and you fail to act to get a child out of that type of danger, the type of danger being imminent death, imminent bodily injury. So these are all very, very subjective things. And what we have to do is the officers, if they're defending the case, what they have to essentially do is they have to make their actions reasonable and try to convince the jury, try to convince the court that at the time that they heard and saw certain things, that they were doing their best, that they were following the protocol, that they were doing these sorts of things. And on the other hand, essentially it's the prosecution's job to prove the opposite, to say, look, there's no reasonable person anywhere that would have done what you guys did.
So why these two? I guess I can understand Arredondo. He is the chief, but Gonzalez, was he the SRO that was there on duty that day?
I believe that's right, and I believe he was the one that essentially didn't go in at the time. And there is an interesting kink in this. We're in Texas, so we're subject. We get to see a little more of the inside baseball than I think that than the rest of the country sees. There's actually a DPS officer, Texas Department of Public Safety, that did not get indicted, but who, by all accounts, was potentially culpable. In fact, there was a state senator who really just kind of stood on his head and called for this person to be indicted. But the Texas Department of Public Safety, they're kind of the teacher's pet, if you will, of law enforcement in Texas. They're the ones that secure the Capitol. They're statewide. They sort of fancy themselves as the Marine Corps, if you will, of law enforcement. In fact, their chief got subpoenaed to go to the grand jury in this case. And he's been the one that called DPS's the law enforcement response an abject failure. But the fact that a DPS officer wasn't indicted and that they only went after some of the local guys, that kind of says a little bit of something, right? So there is a little bit of inside politics going on here. We'll see if that has legs or if that plays out any differently.
Many people that are watching this know that it's not very unusual, Jeremy, for police to be indicted for their actions, but to be indicted for their inactions. Should they be held responsible for not taking action?
Up to the jury to decide, right? And it's what we call in law school, Law 101 here. Everybody's going to get credit watching your show today for this. It's called an inchoate crime. I don't know if I can spell it right. INCHOATE. T-E, crime, which is a crime of omission. It's a crime when you don't act. The key to that offense, though, is you have to have the duty to act, right? If you're a bystander and there's somebody on the street having a heart attack, you don't necessarily, in the abstract, have a duty to go and do anything. If that's your child, that's a different story, though, because you have a duty to do something about it. When you take that oath, the prosecution will argue you have incurred that duty. So they can defend it on two grounds. They can defend it on we didn't have a duty to do this, or assuming that that doesn't work, and I don't think it will, you can also you could also say, kind of what we were talking about, that what I thought at the time was reasonable. And something else to kind of remember here, Jay, there were, I believe, 379 law enforcement officers who were there that day. Almost all of them are going to have body cameras on. So there is going to be a ton of video evidence from every single conceivable angle to reconstruct everything that happened. Now, I don't know how much of that we're going to see in the courtroom. So we should have an extremely clear idea of what actually happened. I would anticipate the prosecution also probably calling some folks to say, look, here was the training that we gave those guys. And we went over the game plan. The game plan was 1, 2, 3, 4. If this happens, this is how we're going to do it. And these guys didn't do those things. We'll see. Again, a lot of emotion, a very fractured community, but there is precedent for this type of case to be acquitted, as happened in Parkland, Florida.
That's right. I believe that was 2017, wasn't when that happened? But nonetheless, so 77 minutes, Jeremy, is what it took for those officers to take action. As a defense, and you're a defense attorney, when you look at 77 minutes, you're putting together a game plan. I mean, is that something that could be a viable defense? Listen, we were not ready for a high-powered rifle. We needed to figure out what to do. Is that something that Arredondo and Garcia possibly could use as a defense?
I think what these guys are going to say, I think they're going to come and they're going to say, we thought that this was a hostage situation, and here's why we thought this was a hostage situation. And Arredondo and the other officer, Adrian Gonzalez, they're in a little bit different boats. Okay, Arredondo is the chief; he's out there making decisions. Gonzalez is sort of a guy who just kind of got, I guess, for lack of a better words, weak in the knees when it came time to take action. So I think they're going to be in a little bit of a different boat. But I would think that Arredondo would basically say, look, here's why I thought this was a hostage situation. And it better be good, right? Because, I mean, when you're wrong about something like this, you're really fabulously wrong. There are consequences when you have this type of responsibility, when you have this many lives in your hand. Think of an airplane pilot. Those guys get trained on protocol. They get trained on every conceivable thing that can possibly go wrong in that aircraft. And if they're wrong, 200, 300 people can die. So they really have to have it down. And I'm a nice guy and I did my best. That's just not going to cut it.
Jeremy, how might the concept of qualified or official immunity impact this case, and what are the implications for law enforcement accountability?
Those type of immunities typically are going to be more applicable to civil lawsuits, to people trying to take Uvalde PD or these officers' individual money. When we see immunity in a criminal case, it's usually a cutout of sorts. In other words, the statute usually says something to the effect of, it's a defense to this if you're a police officer. It's a defense to that if you are doing this. There's a lot of cases, believe it or not, that there's actually no statutory defense for. Believe it or not, and this is going to be a weird one, so just hear me out on this, Jay, okay?
Okay.
The offense of prostitution is committed when one person solicits another for sex.
Okay.
The law makes no exception to who you are. So when we have a police officer who is engaged in a sting against an actual prostitute, they're both actually committing prostitution, but the police officer will obviously never be prosecuted because they're a cop and they're working for the state, and it's all kind of understood that that's not going to happen. So most of the time when we're talking about immunity, it's not really, in fact, it's just sort of as a matter of habit. There's immunity for things, for instance, though, speeding, right? If you're speeding and the officer has to go 120 miles an hour to catch you, he's not speeding. That type of stuff is there. I don't know that there's going to be anything that these officers can rely on in this case.
Okay. How might this trial impact now future law enforcement practices and policies going forward, particularly regarding active shooter situations?
You would think that they're all paying attention and taking notes. You would think that they're all kind of hopefully studying and measuring twice, cutting once when it comes to the plans that they're making to defend against these types of things. And it's inconceivable in this day and age that police aren't training for these types of events in their communities, large and small, in schools, in shopping malls, in public areas. You would hope that police are reforming their policies and 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 sticking to the training on these cases just to make sure that they have a game plan, and when they have the game plan, to stick to that game plan. And not only that, I think the overarching theme here is, look, police officers, you guys are human. You're going to make mistakes when it comes to these situations, tragic as they may be. Let's have them be aggressive mistakes. We're not going to make a mistake where our kids are getting butchered. If we make a mistake, it's going to be a mistake of going in a little too hard. We'll potentially live with that, but this is not an acceptable result.
What about civil, I guess, penalties or liabilities? Is that a potential?
Always a potential. Those are under what you would call the federal statute is 42 USC United States Code Section 1983. That provides for it's essentially police brutality, but it also has to do with when the police ignore or disregard a substantial right. Again, kind of tricky because it's an inchoate crime. Remember, going back to our law school lesson just a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
it's a crime of omission, and typically those cases tend to be cases that involve inaction or rather improper action. So it would be interesting to see how that plays out, but certainly you would think that this would be ripe for litigation.
We've talked to many experts, Jeremy, on this program over the past few months that law enforcement jobs, there are plenty open across this country. What message does this send, this indictment, to law enforcement officers and leaders nationwide?
If you're going to take the oath, you need to be prepared to make some hard decisions. And we ask a lot of our law enforcement. And tragically, one of the things that we ask for is in certain situations, we ask you to put your life on the line. If you're not willing or able to do that, please don't apply. There's plenty of jobs that are out there. There's plenty of ways to put food on the table. But if you're not able to make those types of sacrifices, then maybe this type of job isn't for you.
One final question, Jeremy. How might this case contribute to the broader conversation this country needs to have for not only gun control, school safety, and police accountability?
We're talking today, Jay, about a tragedy. There's no question about that. The fact that we're talking about it is a positive. The fact that we're keeping this narrative going is a positive. The fact that we're talking about solutions, the fact that we're talking about everything that was involved, tragic as it may be, we have to look at that as a positive. So the narrative goes on. This is a bit of a different wrinkle, a bit of a different crease in this. Whether you are, regardless of your feelings about gun control, I think we can all agree that when police do confront these situations, they got to know what they're doing. I think we can all agree on that. And so I think that we just have to take the positive out of this where we can find it. And by keeping the narrative going, hopefully that happens.
Yeah. Jeremy, always a pleasure visiting with you. And maybe next week I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in New Mexico courtroom concerning Alec Baldwin. That seems to be very interesting to me, that case. So, Jeremy, I'll reach out to you and maybe we can touch base here maybe early next week on that. All right? You have yourself a great week, though, however.
Thanks, Jay. Would love to talk. Bye.